You snapped at your team member in a meeting again because you were already frustrated about something else, or you've been told by leadership that your communication style is too direct or too emotional. And you don't even know what they mean because you're just responding to situations as they happen. How about this? You've had the same conflict with a colleague 3 times this month. Different situations, same pattern, same outcome, and you're starting to wonder if the problem is you. Have you ever walked out of a meeting replaying what you said and wishing you could take it back? Or responding to an email when you were frustrated and immediately regretted it? You've noticed people are starting to manage themselves around your mood, waiting to see which version of you shows up before they bring a difficult situation to you. Welcome to Brains and Baubles Live. I'm Davina Dandridge, and today we're talking about something that's costing you more than you realize. You're operating as a triggered responder, and you're professional, but you haven't learned to pause between what happens and how you react. You're a director, a VP, senior professional with real responsibility. We know you're capable. You deliver results, but there's a pattern in how you respond to pressure, how you respond in conflict, and how you act out of frustration that's undermining your leadership effectiveness. People are starting to notice, and it's not about your competency, it's about your reactions. And that reactivity is affecting your credibility, your influence, and your advancement. I'm going to show you why you're operating from default reactions and what is costing your leadership, and how to transition from a triggered responder to an emotional planner. So let's get started. Here's what you need to understand about what's actually happening when you react from your default emotions. You're operating from patterns that you developed when you had less responsibility and less visibility. When you were earlier in your career, a sharp response or an emotional reaction, that might have been manageable. People expected you to be direct. Your passion read as intensity. But at this level, the same reactions that worked before are not read the same now. That sharp response now looks like you can't manage your emotions under pressure. That intensity now looks like volatility. That directness that you always used to use looks like that you can't navigate complexity with nuance. You haven't changed, but the expectations have, and you haven't adjusted how you respond. Let me show you what that looks like in real leadership context. You're in a meeting. Someone challenges your recommendation. Your immediate emotion is frustration. I already explained this. Why aren't they getting it? That frustration shapes your thinking. They're not listening to me. They're questioning my expertise. I need to make this clearer. Those thoughts drive your behavior. You respond more forcefully, your tone sharpens, and you over explain. And that's the behavior that creates an outcome that you didn't intend to happen. So the room gets more tense when you start reacting. People stop engaging, and leadership notices your defense. You didn't mean to shut down the conversation, but you responded from your default emotion instead of responding strategically. And there's where the pattern is costing you. When you respond from your default emotions, people start doubting your judgment under pressure. They see you react sharply when challenged. They watch you get visibly frustrated when things don't go as planned. They notice when your mood affects how you show up. And they start wondering if she can manage her own emotional reactions. Can she manage complex situations that require composure? That doubt affects every leadership interaction, not because you're not capable, but because you're demonstrating that your emotions lead your responses. When you're reacting from default emotions all day, you're exhausting yourself. Every triggered response drains your emotional capacity. Every time you respond sharply and then have to manage the aftermath, You're spending energy you need for strategic thinking. By the end of the day, you're depleted, not from the work itself, but from managing the consequences of your reactions. When people can't predict how you respond, they start managing themselves around you. They wait to bring you difficult information until they think that you're in a good mood. They soften feedback because they're worried about your reaction. They stop challenging your thinking because they don't want to trigger your defensiveness. You're losing access to honest input you need to lead effectively, not because people don't respect you. Okay. They respect what you've done up to this point. They're managing your emotional responses, and that's not their job. Let me tell you something most women in leadership don't learn until it affects a major opportunity. Trigger responding isn't about your emotions being wrong, it's about your emotions leading before your strategy does. The issue isn't that you feel frustrated when people challenge you. That's human. The issue is that your frustration determines your response before you've evaluated what this moment actually requires. Emotional planners feel the same emotions. The difference is they pause between feeling and responding. Let me show you what that looks like for a senior leader I worked with. She was a VP in healthcare, brilliant strategist. Her team delivered consistently, but she kept getting feedback about her communication style. When we mapped out her triggered responses, we found a pattern. Anytime someone questioned her judgment, she immediately had the emotion of defensiveness. And that defensiveness drove her response before she could evaluate what the situation actually called for. In one leadership meeting, a peer questioned her approach to a project, which is normal. Her immediate thought was, he's undermining me in front of the executive team. That thought drove her response. She got sharp. She defended her position forcefully. She made it clear she didn't appreciate being questioned. The meeting moved on, but afterward, the CEO said, I need you to be able to take feedback without getting defensive. That's what's keeping you from the C suite. She was shocked. He saw her as being unable to handle a challenge. Here's what she had to learn: her emotions weren't wrong. Feeling defensive when questioned is natural, but letting the defensiveness lead her response before evaluating what the moment required was costing her advancement. She needed to learn to pause, to ask, is this defensiveness useful information or is it just a default reaction? Does this moment require me to defend or does it require me to engage strategically? The pause is what separates a triggered responder from an emotional planner. Let me walk you through what's happening when you're operating from default reactions. Your emotions impact your thinking. Your thinking impacts your behavior. Your behavior impacts your environment. When someone challenges you and you feel frustrated, that emotion tells you this is a threat. You need to defend yourself. That emotion shapes your thinking. They're questioning my competence. I need to prove I'm right. Those thoughts drive your behavior: sharp tone, forceful defense, and over explanation. And that behavior creates your environment. People stop engaging openly. Leadership questions your ability to handle pressure. That's how triggered responding works. Your default emotion leads, everything else follows. This shift is not about suppressing your emotions, it's about pausing between feeling and responding. You're frustrated. That's information. But before you respond from that frustration, you pause. You ask, what does this moment actually require? Maybe it requires you to defend the position. Maybe it requires you to stay curious, to ask clarifying questions, to find common ground. You can't know what it requires if your emotion is already leading your response. So here's what helps this transition from a trigger responder to an emotional planner: the self gut check method. When someone triggers your default emotion, frustration, defensiveness, irritation, you pause. You breathe, you name what's happening. I'm feeling frustrated. Then you ask three questions: is this true? Is this helpful? And is this the right time? Is this true that this person is attacking me, or are they challenging my thinking? Those are different things. Is it helpful to respond from frustration right now? What does this moment actually require of me? And is this the right time? Do I need to respond immediately, or can I give myself space to respond strategically? The self gut check gives you 2 seconds to choose your response instead of defaulting to your reaction. The self gut check is what separates triggered responding from strategic leadership. One costs you credibility, the other builds it. Let me show you how this works in real leadership context. Someone challenges your recommendation in a meeting. Your immediate emotion is frustration. Your old pattern or your triggered responder self, you feel frustrated. That frustrated drives you to respond. You get sharp. You defend forcefully. You prove you're right. The conversation shuts down. People notice you can't handle challenge. Now, you implement the self gut check method. You become an emotional planner. When you feel frustrated, you pause 2 seconds. Is this true? Is this an attack? Or is this a legitimate question about my approach? Is it helpful to respond for frustration? What does this moment need? Defense or engagement? Is it timely? Do I need to respond immediately, or can I take a breath? You realize this isn't an attack. This is someone trying to understand my thinking. This moment needs clarity and not my defense. You respond: good question. Let me walk you through my rationale. You engage, you stay open, and you maintain credibility. 2 seconds between feeling and responding is the difference between reacting from your default and leading from strategy. Here's another example. You get an email that frustrates you. Your immediate impulse is to respond immediately so they know you're not okay with their approach. The old pattern or your triggered responder self, you respond immediately. Your frustration is clearing your tone, you hit send, then you realize you just made the situation worse. Now you have to manage the aftermath. But if you apply the self gut check method as an emotional planner, you feel the same frustration, but you pause. Is it true that this needs an immediate response? Or am I just reacting to frustration? Or is it helpful to respond now? What do I actually want this email to accomplish? And is this the time? Will waiting 2 hours change the outcome? You close the email, you take a walk, you come back and write a strategic response that addresses the issue without creating additional conflict. Emotional capacity isn't about controlling your feelings. It's about choosing your responses. The self gut check method gives you that choice. The self gut check method is how you build the pause between feeling and responding. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. This isn't about being soft all the time. It's about responding strategically instead of reacting from your default. When you pause before responding, you create space to choose wisdom over reactivity. You can address the issue without creating additional conflict. The self gut check method helps you to do this. You feel the emotion, you name it, you evaluate what this moment requires, you respond from strategies, not from your default. This is how you build credibility under pressure. Strategic leadership means you feel everything and react to nothing. The pause is where your power lives. When you transition from a triggered responder to an emotional planner, everything shifts how you lead. Your emotions shift. Instead of feeling controlled by your reactions, you feel grounded in your responses. Instead of exhaustion from managing all of this aftermath, you feel in control of your emotional capacity. Your thinking shifts. Instead of, I need to defend myself, you think, what does this moment require? Instead of reacting from threat, you respond from strategy. And then your behavior shifts. Instead of sharp reactions that create more tension, you respond with composure that builds credibility. Instead of defaulting to your emotions, you choose your responses. And that behavior creates a different environment, an environment where people bring you difficult information because they trust how you respond, where challenge strengthens your thinking instead of triggering defensiveness, where leadership is defined by your composure and not by your reactions. The leader you want to be in 5 years from now isn't built on suppressing your emotions. She's built by learning how to pause between feeling and responding. She feels frustration. She names it. She evaluates what the moment requires, and then she responds strategically. The future version of yourself uses the self gut check method automatically. She doesn't react from her default, she responds from this strategy. And that creates specific outcomes in leadership. Your credibility strengthens because people see you handle pressure with composure. Your emotional capacity expands because you're not exhausting yourself by managing all of this aftermath. Your influence continues to grow because people trust you with difficult information, and you can't help but have your advancement accelerate because you've demonstrated you can lead yourself before leading others. This is what emotional sophistication looks like in leadership. You're not controlled by your reactions, you're choosing your responses. Now, let me address something practical. You need support building the capacity to pause between feeling and responding without appearing indecisive. You need help identifying your default reactions and what triggers them. And that's why I created SOPHI, my emotional strategy AI. SOPHI isn't therapy. She's strategic guidance for transitioning from a triggered responder to an emotional planner. You can walk through the self gut check method when you're triggered. You can identify your patterns. You can develop strategic responses instead of defaulting to reactions. She's available whenever you need her. So think of SOPHI as your private strategist for building emotional capacity. You now have the self gut check method. Here's your implementation step. Tomorrow, identify one situation that typically triggers your default reaction. Maybe it's being challenged in meetings, maybe it's getting certain kinds of email, maybe it's a specific colleague. Next time it happens, pause. Just 2 seconds. Name the emotion, ask the 3 questions, choose your response instead of defaulting to your reaction. That's how you start building the pause. Thank you for being here today on Brains and Baubles Live. If you're ready to transition from a trigger responder to an emotional planner, start with the Emotional Sophistication Map. It shows your default reaction and what's triggering them. You can take it at my website, davinadandridge.com. From there, the Self Gut Check course gives you the framework for building the pause between feeling and responding. And SOPHI provides private support for developing this capacity. Your potential as a leader is limitless. Your emotional capacity is just beginning to be fully developed. Until next time, Sophisticated.